Hello and welcome to ICA in Conversation that broadcasts on the second and fourth Wednesdays of each month and focusing on current issues and challenges in the context of compliance and counter-financial crime. I'm Tim Tyler, and coming up we're going to consider decision-making within organisations, within business. What can go wrong and why? To do this, I'm delighted to be joined by Paul Eccleson. Paul is an experienced risk consultant, chief risk and compliance officer, and a non-executive director. He's chair of the Audit and Risk Committee at the National Museums Liverpool, and now chair of the world-renowned Old Vic Theatre School. Paul studied psychology and artificial intelligence and has brought this particular perspective to his work, including time spent teaching on the ICA's postgraduate diploma program. Today's format will be the same as we've seen previously. 20 minutes discussion between myself and Paul, followed by 10 minutes answering your questions and observations. And as previously, we're very keen for you to share your thoughts, any questions that you may have. You can do this through the comments section on the LinkedIn event. So please do that. But right now, though, Paul, it's an absolute pleasure having this opportunity to work with you again and to continue this conversation about decision-making in business. Something, of course, that's of fundamental importance in the context of compliance in particular. And it's not difficult to see examples of poor decision-making. I know, Paul, you've suggested that there can be many, many reasons for poor decision-making, that we aren't wholly rational as human beings. I wonder if we could begin there, and I can invite you to unpack and make sense of this.
Sure. Firstly, thanks for inviting me on for this, a topic I could talk about a lot, Tim. We're not rational all the time. I know we'd love, you and I, to think we were logical and rational all the time, but we're not, because in calorific terms, in energy terms, we can't afford to be. This fantastic organ in our heads, our brains, is the most calorie-consuming organ we have in our bodies. Forget exercise, forget all the running around, forget everything else that's going on. This thing here consumes most of our calories in a day, which means, unfortunately, that we spend most of our lives with lazy brains. Our brains don't want to switch on that calorific, burning intensity of thinking. One of the best ways to illustrate this is think back to when we were learning to drive, Tim. You know, whether we were changing clutches, we were looking in mirrors, we were doing mirror signal maneuvers. In that first lesson, when you were let loose with the driver shaking next to you, you got out of that car exhausted. And that's because you had to think about every movement, every mirror signal maneuver, every gear change, and if you've never learned to drive, why don't learning tennis, learning any manual skill, thinking is exhausting. If you're learning in a library, swatting for an exam, you come away from that. All you've done is sat there and maybe walked 20 yards to the fridge, but you're exhausted at the end of that because your brain has consumed all of those calories. And so the reason we aren't rational all of the time is that we can't afford to be. The reason we're brilliant human beings is we develop shortcuts. And that's the basis of that statement, which is we're not rational, it's expensive. And so any opportunity our brain has to kind of kick back its heels and opt out of that kind of stuff, it does. And shortcuts are common in our world. And the shortcuts become biases. Now, I actually don't like the word bias. People will have heard of cognitive biases all the time, but I actually don't like that word. The reason I don't like that word is that developing rules for doing things quickly in our lives is why we're brilliant as human beings. It's why we're really good. It's why we get through our lives. We can't afford to think about everything. So, for example, if you take behavioral economics biases in the way we buy things, we can be nudged. Those biases can be exploited really rather simply. So, for example, if I ask you to give me the price of a wireless keyboard, then you can guess. Okay, and the range of guesses that people will have will be from very cheap to very expensive, and people don't really know how much they cost, so they guess. However, if I ask a bunch of people to remember their national insurance number or their national identification number, the last 3 digits of that number, when you think about it, will bias you towards how much you pay for the keyboard. So if those 3 numbers are higher, you will pay or want to pay more than if they're lower. If someone writes an article in a newspaper and says bye-bye at the end, and you turn over and there's an advert, you are much more likely to buy the product in the advert if the article on the previous page had bye-bye written on it. These things are not conscious. These things are not rational, but they are the way our brain behaves. It's any shortcut it can hang on to, Tim.
So, I mean, there's so much we could unpack, and we're constrained with time, but it is a confounding truth, isn't it? That we don't make decisions necessarily driven by logic, even though we think we're being logical. You gave the example of the last 3 digits of our national insurance number, high, low sort of thing. And that is incredibly difficult for us to really understand and unpack. So I say this because it means that we go through our lives largely unaware of these cognitive, I'm not going to use the word biases because you're encouraging another way of
rules, heuristics.
Heuristics, yes.
Okay.
So thank you. I mean, this is really, really helpful. But I know that there are, in your mind, certainly a number of other areas that will influence decision making and lead to poor decision making. And so we've covered one really, really very, very well.
Okay, so let's take that as a given.
Okay,
the research on bias, is we as individuals are pretty rubbish at making decisions, and we think we aren't, but we are. I mean, just let's take that.
Yes.
There are another reason for our success as Homo sapiens, why we're the dominant species on this planet, is that we work in groups. We are hardwired to work together as a team. So, early human, one-on-one an antelope, no chance. It'll run off, it'll attack him, no chance. If we work as a small team, we get lunch. And so that whole team working need to be associated with a team is hardwired into our evolutionary DNA, which means in business terms, working as a team is highly, highly, highly valued. And we'll have heard that in all of the organizations we talk about. You are a good team player. You fit in well round here. We work as a team very well together. The counterpart of that, Tim, is that it has been shown that working very closely together as a team can mean that you make really poor decisions as a consequence. And what leads to that is wanting to be a team player and conform and not challenge and not review evidence which is contradictory, to disregard the view of outsiders, to not review the risks that the team decision has made, in the decision that the team has made. Basically, don't rock the boat. Conform. Being a team player means being loyal, and being loyal means perhaps ignoring all the negative evidence and ignoring all the negative consequences of the decisions that have been taken. The first research on this produced a work called groupthink, which I think you're aware of. Irving Janis, around about 1970. Rather alarmingly, Irving Janis chose the word groupthink because it's in George Orwell's 1984. So there's a direct heritage
yes, it is.
to a dystopian world.
Yes.
So you put those two together, Tim, that's what's causing most of the decision pressure in any organization.
That's really helpful.
Yeah,
but this idea of groupthink, I mean, you mentioned the 1970s, but of course it's not entirely new. I mean, we can go back to Friedrich Nietzsche and other philosophers who've talked about
Exactly
herd
right.
mentality, which is, for me, I
Exactly
think
right.
very much the same thing.
Exactly right.
But it does, I mean, if I may, just sort of drilling down
Yeah,
for a
go ahead.
moment,
You go ahead.
we're thinking about this as compliance professionals. And compliance professionals are part of a business. They're part of a bigger team. And so it can be very difficult for us to, on the one hand, recognize that we are servants of the business.
Yes.
And we were looking to support it, to help it to meet business objectives and so on. But on
Yes.
the other hand, we're still part of a team, but we may not be able to conform all the time with the team's thinking.
And what's really interesting about this, Tim, is all of the research that you pointed at, including the philosophy that you points at the fact that if this, let's call it groupthink, is going on, it needs someone to challenge respectfully what the decisions have been made. Have you looked at all the alternatives? Have you considered the objectives and whether that's being delivered by the decision you've just made? What are the risks? What are the backup plans? What information have you looked at which is negative to the decision you're doing? Yeah. Now, of course, if you're a highly cohesive team, you don't want to hear any of that, right? And we've all been in teams when risk and compliance has been seen as the business police, right? But a positive part of our role in any organization could be that we are there to help improve decision.
Yeah.
We deliberately, respectfully, organizationally neutral. So we bring fact checking and risk analysis. And excuse me, do you think that's right? Maybe we should just take a little bit of a second to think of ways in which this could break. We as risk and compliance genuinely could bring that to the table. It can actually be part of our role to help the business make better decisions by deliberately being a devil's advocate in a room.
And there's a skill to this, of course, isn't there? I know that's not the focus for today's webinar, but no. It's about timing. It's about having the right communication skills. It's about speaking to people outside of meetings, for instance, gaining support for an opinion before it becomes confrontational and so on. So all of this is important, isn't it?
It's key. The key skill for you as an individual, if you're going to behave like that, is listening, is understanding how that position came about, how the senior managers in the team and how the junior managers in the team responded, and trying to understand why the group came to that decision, and then playing the other role of going, okay, let me just question why you did that. But first, you have to understand why that came about in the first place. Otherwise, you're just being annoying, rather than actually understand why. Why their world is
so important that and I was talking about this with someone else earlier on today, that there's a danger within compliance that we kind of feel we know our stuff. We know the compliance, we know the regulatory space and so on. And it's our role to tell the business what to do. But actually, you make a really good point that first of all, we need to listen.
Yes.
We need to understand the business, where it's trying to go, what it's trying to achieve, what the operating model is, what the supply chain is, and then we can engage. And to a certain extent, we can use the right language, the right people that we're engaging, and at the right time in order to be effective.
And to describe that in psychological terms, there are two types of behaviors that we're describing there, Tim. One is push behaviors, which is, I'm right, you have to do this, the regulator will be annoyed, we might be fined, you could go to jail. We've all used those phrases. I know we've all used those phrases. Good, but those are push behaviors. That's my agenda onto you. The kind of things we've just been explaining, active listening, let me say what I understood you said there, playing back, that's called pull behaviors. That's behaviors that are listening to the other person's world and bringing it forward. If all the research in psychology says that if you adopt those behaviors, you are 75% more likely to influence someone's decision with pull behaviors than you are with push behaviors. And just try and get your head around that.
Incredible,
which is
isn't it? Incredible.
Just listening makes it much more likely that you'll succeed.
So if I may, there's some interesting points that have been made in the comments section. Nigel, for instance, thinking about the fact we don't want to rock the boat. We ultimately hurt the organization if we aren't prepared to rock the boat. It's pushed as it's best to be a team player but that can lead to project failure. So I think it's echoing, isn't it? Very much the
It's
same point.
actually right. That don't rock the boat, be a good team player. What does loyalty mean? And there are some, obviously there are some really serious examples of where teams have adopted really aggressive behaviors and really destructive behaviors, where the definition of a loyalty was to cover people's backs. The definition of loyalty was be so strong a team player that actually turn a blind eye when I do something really horrible. And it's the way that if you work from small misdemeanors all the way up to large misdemeanors, it becomes socially acceptable as a social norm within teams to actually behave this way. And
Yes.
Conforming means turning a blind eye. And once you get there, that's really destructive.
Of course.
You're absolutely right.
And I think we're going to come back to this. But in the meantime, Caroline, thank you so much for your observation. Caroline says, as a former regulator, she is amazed that so many compliance people still don't look at regulation as an operational issue, not a legal one. That recognises the importance of engaging with the business as it is and not necessarily as we might want it to be. But let's come back to our focus, if I may. We're talking about the reasons for poor decision making, and so far we've talked about that echo chamber, that desire to conform within the team, and we've talked about our lazy brains.
Yeah.
Can we go further? Are there other drivers that we need to be alert to?
Yeah, so there is another tendency, and we've kind of touched about that, which is slightly beyond team allegiance, is this: we don't like getting involved and actually essentially bystander intervention. We find it really hard as individuals that if it is going wrong, particularly inside the team, but even outside the team, we really don't like getting involved when something's going wrong. So maybe there are some people who know that decision is incorrect, but actually the social norm appears to be that we're just going with that decision anyway. Actually, we don't like to get involved. Now, there is some great research here. Is if somebody sees somebody stealing a purse or violence in the streets, people don't get involved if there are large numbers of people around. So everybody, and you can see this happening on videos, they all look at each other going, is anybody going to do anything about this? Well, I don't want to do anything about this. Perhaps it's dangerous. They don't want to step out of the line. It's that diffusion of responsibility happens in social situations. And that's exactly what we get in organizations, is that if a decision has been made and it has unintended, nasty, unethical consequences, if the social norm is, let's just turn a blind eye, that's what we will do. So not only will we make poor decisions and not challenge poor decisions and base it on selected information, because that's what the right answer is, when some people know it's the wrong one, we will step away. And guess what? Risk and compliance is not supposed to do that, is it?
Exactly.
Again, we are deliberately designed to be other in these circumstances.
Can I give you an example that for me, it's a very, very prosaic, basic example that illustrates I hope it illustrates the point that you make. And it's something that happened to me 40 years ago, not far from where I am in the City of London. I was in the City of London Police. We were policing a demonstration that was marching down Fleet Street. There were thousands and thousands of people in this demonstration, and there was a line of police officers that were just walking with the demonstrators as they marched down Fleet Street, dozens of police officers along the side of the march. Now, the reason I mention this is because there was an enormous crash, a car crash off to the left. And I was looking down the line of police officers, and all of them, bear in mind the car crash is over here to the left, all of them looked to the right. Because they recognised, if I see this, I'm now involved in it, I have to do something.
They literally look the other way.
Literally look the other way. All the way down the line.
Extraordinary.
Incredible.
Well, and that brings me to another point about what else helps us make really poor decisions, is that if we followed all of that route and we're now in a position of being actually really morally uncomfortable about what we've done. I'm not living up to the standards I hoped my mum would expect of me. All of that kind of stuff. We tell ourselves comforting stories. We actually say, well, maybe it wasn't that serious. Maybe the crash wasn't that serious. The traffic police will deal with that. It's somebody else's responsibility. All of that kind of thing. I suspect we've all heard this in our organizations. I mean, I give you my example, which was I'm working for a large insurer. We were looking at the kinds of covers that we should put into a new product. There were 3 or 4 covers that had never been claimed on in their entire history. Now, what that means in insurance is that if they've never been claimed, they are entirely useful heads of cover. Nobody needs them because in the last 20 years, nobody has ever claimed against those things. But we were going to put them in, and we were going to charge for them, even though we knew no one was ever going to claim. And so that was, well, you know what, if they don't read the terms and conditions, if they don't read the key facts documents, if they don't read all of the information we give them, then it's their own fault, isn't it? And that's a kind of a victim blaming, really. It's a kind of, well, they're too stupid to understand the policy, then they shouldn't be buying the policy, should they? And that's, you have to be prepared for those kinds of
and that, of course, that's very, very similar to the seeds behind the recent financial scandal about mis-selling of employment insurance or car HP and so on. It's very similar in nature. And of course, the consequences can be staggering, billions of pounds in costs being incurred.
And in our business, if no one's ever claiming, then you can pay very large amounts of commission to people because no one's ever claiming. It's a really profitable product. So it doesn't really matter to you how much you pay up front. That's going to pay over time if someone keeps renewing. And of course, there's inertia renewals. So all of this, what I'm interesting to say, what we're saying is all of that understanding of the basic human biases and failings in human psychology is used in our business.
Yes.
Inertia selling, all of that kind of stuff. So we have to be the ones that are calling some of this out respectfully, because we're, as you say, we're still part of the larger team, but our role is to do that.
So there are some really fascinating observations that have been made. I'd like to draw upon. Ben Jones, great to have you with us. Ben, and of course we work together in a different context, but thank you for joining us today. Ben's drawing attention to the post office scandal. And in particular, when the CEO received an email warning her that she wasn't getting the right advice from people that she had surrounded herself with. So I think there's a number of different things going on in here, isn't there? There's the echo chamber element to this, but also the challenge around confronting something that may be going wrong that you touched on as well.
There are 2 things, and it seems to me that that's a good example of confirmation bias, which is I've got this theory about what's going on, and I'm only going to listen to ideas which confirm that. I'm not going to open myself up to the fact that I might have been wrong. And of course, the consequences at that point of saying I might have been wrong is years worth of prosecution. And it doesn't start. Nobody starts like this on the first prosecution, but by the time you've done the 110th, it's a really, really big step to say, you know what, I think we might have been wrong at this point. Yeah. And what it requires is a risk and compliance team to go, here's some facts, here's the way it is, this is the way we feel that you've taken that chance.
So for me, this is, I know we were speaking about this before the webinar, that very often catastrophic decisions don't start with the catastrophe. It starts tiny. This is particularly true of corruption. Corruption doesn't start with hundreds of thousands of pounds in brown paper bags. No. It starts with a lavish lunch that's not recorded in the hospitality register and therefore compromises the individual. Yeah. Then it can be very difficult to withdraw from that, and it builds and builds.
Yeah, and it's to do, and again, that's to do with that discomfort, that moral discomfort I was talking about. It's cognitive dissonance, ethical dissonance. I don't feel right about what I just did, but if it's incrementally only a little bit worse than the last thing I did, then maybe I can tell myself a story which is just small enough to cover that up. Well, just maybe this time I'll do it. Well, the expenses thing kind of worked okay. Nobody got hurt with that one. No one's really going to get hurt with this one either, are they? You can hear those stories. Now, the important thing to say about those stories is that they're not rationalizations to give to the world. They are rationalizations to give to yourself.
Yes.
Which is why in your line of business, in crime or in our careers, we'll have heard someone produce a rationalization for having done something terrible, which sounds just so self-delusional.
Yes.
That you just think, how could they could possibly believe that that was true?
That's one point of the Cressy fraud triangle, isn't it?
Yes.
So the Cressy fraud triangle recognizes that most frauds have three ingredients. One is a driver, that could be greed, it could be addiction or something similar. Second is the opportunity, and the third is a rationalization. It's your fault. You've got weak controls. You shouldn't have allowed me to do it, or something.
Yeah, senior management didn't give me any stock options for the last 10 years, so I just took my worth. Yeah. But the important thing to say about the Cressy triangle is that the rationalization was, as he described it, was rationalization to the world.
Yes.
What you're actually trying to do is close that dissonance inside you.
Yes.
Which is why people come over as though they actually believe this. They actually believe they're doing the world a huge justice by selling blood testing machines that don't work. But when you interview them, they believe it.
Yes.
And because they have to. Otherwise, the internal cognitive dissonance will take over, and they will.
And that touches on something else that I know you've talked about, and that is that we don't want to admit that we're wrong.
Absolutely.
So we hang on to that rationalization, even when it becomes utterly ridiculous, because the alternative is to admit, I'm a bad person, but I did a bad thing.
And one thing risk and compliance can do, not only are there, but in decisions, is to do a kind of reverse stress testing in risk change, which actually say, let's think of all the things that could possibly be wrong or go wrong about this idea. And what that's doing is creating a space in which people can safely admit that maybe I was wrong about this, or maybe I didn't consider the alternatives, or maybe I didn't understand the risk. It's our job to create that safe space to go, you know what, I think possibly we made the wrong decision.
Yeah, that's tricky. There's an art to that, of course. Because there has to be boundaries and there has to be accountability, and it's finding the balance between the two.
But, and I've watched teams fall apart when we're doing that as well. Yeah. When everyone says, "I've always thought that," when actually it's a tricky thing to do. But go ahead.
Can I raise a question that we're rapidly running out of time, or we're running out of time, 60 seconds a minute. But Daria's made a really interesting point. So Daria, thank you for this. She agrees that speaking up is critical, but I wonder if we're framing the challenge too narrowly. In my experience, the bigger question is, how do we shift from a compliance versus business mindset to one where compliance is woven into the decision-making fabric from the outset? I think it's a really good question. And of course, it's a big question, and there's no simple, straightforward answer to it. But any thoughts from yourself on this?
It's a really good question. It's, I hate the phrase, "it was the business's fault," because actually that's an immediate boundary. All I can say is this kind of branding of "we help you make better decisions," if we can get that ingrained in our set of objectives and our role profiles, is actually there is a decision-making improvement set of activities that we can have, fact-checking tools, scenarios, games, those kinds of things, which are there just intended to help decision-making. And maybe some of the fear of the rule book that's behind that will go away, and people will begin to understand, actually, they're just here to try and make us do the right thing.
And I think that's something that you're involved with in your current work.
Exactly right. So I'm trying to build up a toolkit which allows us to challenge. I call it my armory of dissent, which sounds like it's too much into a bottle, so I'll need to rebrand it. But essentially, I'm saying, really, our role in risk and compliance is to redefine ourselves to help us make the best decisions. And that means in the broadest sense, not just the compliance sense.
Brilliant. Thank you. So we're coming up to a close. In a moment, I'm just going to ask you for any closing thoughts. But before I do that, Paul, can I just quickly summarize some of the areas that we've talked about? We've recognized that there can be a number of reasons why we don't act rationally. And I think the starting point was just recognition that we might think that we do, but the reality is that we don't. And it's useful to recognize what acts on our minds. And we've talked about our lazy brains. We've talked about our echo chamber and the sort of the drive to conform with people around us. The look the other way mentality, which is extraordinary when we could actually walk past someone who's perhaps lying on the street or something similar that's captured in the New Testament with the parable of the Good Samaritan, but we perhaps shouldn't feel it's so very, very bad or unusual when that can happen quite regularly around us. We've talked about our reluctance to admit we got something wrong and our willingness to rationalize poor decisions or poor behavior through any number of a different set of drivers. And finally, we've recognized that poor decision making isn't necessarily cliff edge. It can be incremental and over time.
I agree. And as a final comment, if you listen to what Tim has just said, what you're being asked of in your role as a risk and compliance professional is to kind of overcome all of those biases. You have to be the person who walks towards something. You have to be the person who thinks through the alternatives and the risks. You have to go, I'm not really here to conform, I'm here to respect, but actually my job is to explore the space that you're not exploring because of the biases that I know you have. And those are really, really valuable skills to be developing as a risk and compliance professional.
Paul, thank you so much for what's been a fascinating and an enjoyable conversation. Thank you also for all of us, all of us that have joined from around the world, for those that have added their thoughts and comments, and there's been some interesting conversations going on within the comments section, which is really, really good to see. I'm sorry we didn't get to all of the questions, but nonetheless, I'm very, very grateful to them. And can I wish everybody that's here today on this webinar a very good day, good rest of your day, and do take care wherever you are. Thank you.